Hi everyone, welcome to another Friday Night Live. Hope you're all okay. Hope you've had a good week. Um, Looking forward to a slightly different summer holiday maybe this year. Anyway, we're going to be looking at carrying on our series this evening, looking at people who found themselves in an isolated place, in a wilderness place, in a desert place. We've already looked at two Bible characters so far. 2 weeks ago, Nessa looked at Joseph, and we looked at the lessons that he learned while he was waiting for his dreams to be fulfilled. And last week, Michael and Sarah talked us through Eve's experience of being in isolation, and we looked at how our disobedience and how sin can separate us from God. This week, we're looking at our third Bible character again, as with the other two, found in the book of Genesis, and her name is Hagar. And she's a really interesting character, and I'm really looking forward to trying to bring her to life for you this evening. Her story is really involved, so you have to get there with me while I go through some of the background of her story. Her story is very much tied up with the story of two other characters in the Bible. Now, you may not have heard of Hagar, but you probably will have heard of Abraham and Sarah. Abraham is known as the father of the Hebrew, the Jewish, the Israelite nation. And at the time that Hagar first appears in this story, they are known slightly different names. They're known as Abraham and Sarai. And God changes their names later on. And what I'm going to do is just look at a bit of the background in Genesis chapter 12 and Genesis chapter 15 to start off with, where Abraham is actually given a message by God. God actually appears to him and asks him to take his household, so to take Sarai and all their servants. They didn't have any children, from Haran, where they were living at the time, to a place called Canaan, which is a distance of 7,568.9 miles. So I want you to imagine, those of you who did the climb, the Tearfund climb, a few months ago, seems like ages ago now, but I don't know how many flights of stairs that would be. I don't know how many steps that would be to go from Haran to Canaan. But what you've got to remember also at this point is that Abraham and Sarai, when they're asked to make this journey, they're both about 75 years old. So picture this, picture your grandparents, or I'm just picturing my mother trying to do the stair climb, even the Ben Nevis one, the shortest height. One of the shortest height would actually still be too much for her, and yet God is asking Abraham and Sarai to go on this incredible journey. But along with this request comes a really, really interesting promise. God actually speaks to Abraham and says, I will give you numerous descendants. I will give you more descendants than the stars you can see in the night sky. And obviously, that is loads. If you look at a night sky, obviously not in Birmingham, but maybe if you go into the countryside and you try counting the stars, it's impossible. So God makes this incredible promise to Abraham and Sarai. But again, look at how old they are. How is this promise going to be fulfilled? Now, this story, a bit like Joseph's story, does involve some waiting. And Hagar enters this story because Sarai gets a bit fed up of waiting. I mean, I don't like waiting. I mean, who does like waiting? I mean, it's hard, isn't it? And in this season, there seems to be been a lot of it. I'm currently waiting and trying not to get too excited in case anything goes wrong. But I really want to go and see my mum at the beginning of August. I'm quite excited about that. But the waiting for it, I mean, I haven't seen her since September, so it just seems like a really, really long wait. So waiting's hard. And Sarai is barren. She has never been able to produce a child, a son or an heir or even a daughter for her husband. And culturally at that time, that was just a highly unacceptable thing. She would have felt quite a lot of shame around that. So she's in a place of waiting and she's really struggling. So then she has an idea. You can debate amongst yourselves whether you think this is a good idea or not. But what she actually does, she gets her servant girl Hagar. This is where Hagar enters the story. Okay, Hagar is from Egypt, and when I say servant girl, the word that more accurately would describe her would be a slave. So she wouldn't have been paid in that sense. She was actually Sarai and Abraham's personal property, much like you would own a mobile phone or a laptop. So basically, Sarai can do with Hagar exactly what she wants. So she takes Hagar and she gives her Hagar to Abraham. essentially as his second wife, to produce an heir through her. So, so Hagar essentially is being used as a surrogate mother. Obviously, this is not going to come without its problems and its complications, and these soon arise when Hagar does conceive. And in Genesis chapter 16, it talks about the fact that she realizes that she is expecting a child, and then this creates a lot of friction, understandably, between Hagar and Sarai. It talks in the Bible about the fact that Hagar starts to despise her mistress, which seems like quite a strong word. What it probably means is that she was feeling a little bit superior to her because she had this new life growing inside her, and this was something that Sarai had not been able to do for her husband. It was an important thing to produce a son and an heir, but Sarai had been unable to do that, and Hagar has seemed to have been able to achieve this goal. So Hagar might have felt a little bit superior in her position, but it's also likely that this was mixed with fear, because she's in a very vulnerable situation right now. Remember, she is Sarai and Abraham's personal possession. She is a slave. Okay, she's not her own person, which means that this life growing inside of her does not belong to her either. This child, as soon as it is born, can lawfully at this time be given to Abraham and Sarai, and Hagar would not necessarily have anything to do with it. So imagine how that would have felt for her. Sarai, on the other hand, is bound to have felt some resentment, because she's looking at Hagar, who's a lot younger than her, Abraham's second wife, being able to produce this heir, this child, and thinking, this is something that I can't do. This is something that I wanted to do, but I can't do, and this woman can do it. And she may have felt a bit insecure as well, and maybe a bit surplus to requirements at this point. Things, understandably, were going to blow up in a big way. You just think some of the soap operas on the television. I mean, I don't tend to watch things like EastEnders anymore because it tends to stress me out. But just take that and just multiply it thousands and thousands of times. Just think, these two women are living under the same roof. Tense, right? I mean, how awful is that? But then you could also argue that Sarai brought this on herself. It's her fault, right? Difficult situation. But even in difficult situations, even hard, inexplicable situations, God is still in control. We can be assured of this. Hagar makes a choice. Given all the things we've just talked about, given how she's feeling at this time, I think the fear that she's feeling just takes over at this point. And this is a difficult situation for her, living in that kind of hostility in that household. She leaves, she runs away, and she finds herself a pregnant woman alone in a desert place. And this is where God meets her. And we'll pick this up in Genesis chapter 16, verse 7, where it says, "The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, 'Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?' 'I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai,' she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, 'Go back to your mistress and submit to her.'" It's not an easy request, is it? The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now pregnant and you will give birth to a son." And it goes on to talk a bit about her son, who will be called Ishmael, which means God hears. And that's important to hold on to. Consequently, in verse 18, it says, Hagar gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. She said, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." So she met with God in this desert place. And just like we learned some important lessons from Joseph and Eve's stories about being in isolation, we can learn some important lessons from Hagar's story at this point too. There's a lot in that passage, and we can maybe unpick some of the things that may seem a bit difficult to understand and wrestle with those things a bit in the Zoom chat after this session. But for now, we're going to look at 3 points, and we're going to think of these carefully. and think about how they apply to our own lives. First of all, the angel said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? Hagar wasn't on her own in the world. There are thousands and thousands of people living in the area where she was living. I don't know the exact statistics, but it would have been lots of people. And yet God picks her out. He finds her, an insignificant, apparently, slave girl in a desert, and he knows her name. Imagine the effect that might have had on her. She might have been looking at Sarai and thinking, Sarai's got her husband, she's got love, she's got a comfortable home. Comparing yourself with other people is never a good idea. I know, I've tried it and it just makes me miserable. Okay? Whereas Hagar can be thinking, actually, yeah, God may know Sarai's name, but he also knows mine. He knows me and is interested in my life. Same for you. When you're looking at your friends, when you're thinking, oh my goodness, they're really popular, they're really clever. This person in you's got seems to have a much better relationship with Jesus than I've got. This person's got much better clothes than I've got. This person has got more likes on Facebook. As more people seem to be responding to their posts on their pictures on Instagram, all that kind of stuff. Actually, God may love them and he may know their name, but he also knows your name too. You are significant to him. That's the first thing. The next two things we'll look at together. In verse 11, the angel said to Hagar, I have heard of your misery. I have heard of your misery. So along with the fact that God knows her name, he also heard Hagar. Now, we don't know at this point if she actually said something out loud, whether she was actually crying out loud, but there was obviously something going on in her heart. Okay, so there were things going on in her heart. She was thinking things, she was feeling things, she was burdened, and God met her there. And alongside that also, in verse 13, it says, in response to this, Hagar says, you are the God who sees me. So God hears us and he sees us. And when we say sees, that means he sees right in here. He doesn't see our pictures on Instagram, although he may well do. He doesn't see our posts on Facebook, although he does. And that's important when you bear in mind that he does see those things when you think about it. What we're writing, what we're posting, that if we knew that he could see those things, maybe we wouldn't. Who knows? Challenge to me as well there. But he sees and he hears right to the very core of us, right to the heart of us. And for Hagar, that meant he knew exactly how she was feeling in that moment. Think about how she was feeling. Lost, alone, isolated, abandoned. God sees her. God heard the very cry of her heart and he saw her in that moment. Think about this week, what you've gone through this week. This has been a kind of weird week, I think, for a lot of people. It's been a weird week for me because I finished not just work for the summer term, which has obviously been a really weird term, but I've also finished work at this school, so I don't know what lies ahead of me in September. So it's a bit of a weird time for me. But God hears me in that. He sees me in that. He also knows my name and can put his finger on my situation and speak into that. Okay, so what's your week been like? If you're in year 6, you more than likely have missed out on going around school with your school shirt, getting all your friends to sign it. And that's a big deal. It may not seem a big deal when you look at the news and in the world scale of things, but actually, if it matters to you that you haven't been able to do that and you were looking forward to doing that, that matters to God too. He knows your name. You're significant to him. He hears you when you voice your disappointment to him, and he sees you. You may have had a really, really good week. I've been able to get out to the park. I get really excited when I see a squirrel, so it's all a real blessing for me when that happens. And I can hear God laughing with me and smiling with me because he knows the things that delight my heart. What are the things that give you joy? God knows those things. He knows your name. He hears you. He sees you. He knows the things that bring you joy. And he can meet you in all circumstances and all situations. Just try saying to yourself, You are the God who sees me. You are the God who sees me. You are the God who sees me. What difference would that really make? I know I'm talking to myself. If I could get that to travel from my head to my heart and really believe that in all situations, in everything, particularly in this post-COVID, post-lockdown weirdness where we're getting used to what people are saying is a new normal. What does that mean in terms of knowing that in everything, in all the ups and downs and uncertainty of life, God sees us? Well, it made a massive difference to Hagar because she's able to obey God's command that he gives her in verse 9, and she is able to return to her mistress. That couldn't have been an easy thing for her. Her situation hadn't changed. Her circumstances were exactly the same. So what was it that made her go back? God knows her name. God hears her. God sees her. Maybe it's just those simple, significant three things. To conclude then, God continues to remember Hagar. 14 years later, she actually finds herself in a desert place for a second time. Sarai, now called Sarah, has actually produced her own heir, her husband Abraham's own heir, which was the promise that God gave them all those years ago. And at this point, Sarah, when she's got her own son Isaac, she throws Hagar out of the house with her son Ishmael. So they both are thrown out of the home. And Hagar once again finds herself in a desert place. And we can read about this in Genesis 21, where it says, as she sat there, she began to sob. She's sitting in the desert, and what she's done, she's actually moved her son Ishmael away from her because she doesn't want to see him die. That's how desperate she is. They've run out of water. She can't see any water anywhere, and in a desert, that's a big deal, but God is practical. He's interested in every aspect of our lives. So this is what happens next. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar?" Again, he calls her name. 14 years later, he hadn't forgotten her. She may have lost her way a little bit in those 14 years and forgotten how God met her in that wilderness place. But he still remembers her name. "Do not be afraid," he says to her. "God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, and I will make him into a great nation." Fantastic promise. Not only of Sarah and Abraham got the start of their descendants, they've got their son, Isaac. God promises that through Ishmael, Hagar will have many descendants too. God is amazing. Out of such a bad situation, out of Sarai's original unwise choice, God can bring good out of that. That's really exciting, isn't it? And that's kind of reassuring for when we kind of get things wrong a bit. Then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. Told you he was practical. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. Okay, so I think the lesson you can learn here is just like with Hagar, we can end up in a desert place more than once. I know for me, going through lockdown, it's been very much a journey of ups and downs. It's been like a very bumpy ride like this. And one day I can be full of joy, thinking, yeah, I'm going to walk around the park. I'm going to see how many squirrels I can see, even maybe hang out with a friend at social distance, obviously. And literally the next day it can be chucking it down with rain like it's been doing a lot later. And I'm like, for goodness sake, I can't even be bothered to move off the sofa. I'm just going to binge on Netflix. And if I'm ruled by my emotions, that's not very healthy for me. Whereas if I'm ruled by what I learn from Hagar's story, if I take into me and understand fully and start to try and speak truth over myself, like God sees me, God hears me, God knows my name, then I can start to live differently. It doesn't matter maybe if I get up one morning and just feel a bit rubbish. because those promises are still true. God still knows my name. He still hears me. He still sees me. It was the same for Hagar at the end of this story. It's the same for me, and it's the same for you. We can never get away from God. His love always surrounds us. We're going to chat about this a bit more in Zoom after this session. It'd be really good to catch up with you then. I just want to finish though by reading another Bible passage, and then we'll be able to come together and maybe do some questions together after that. This is a well-known psalm written by King David called Psalm 139. It says, "For the director of music of David, a psalm" at the top. And actually, David wrote this out of a place of really knowing the desert place too, of really knowing and some of the lessons that Hagar had to learn. And he knew that God knew his name, heard him, and saw him. It says, starting at verse 1, "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before." Never get away from him. "And you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me to attain. Too wonderful for me. Too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. In light, in joy, in darkness and in certainty, God is the same, and he loves us. He is faithful. Remember, he knows your name, he hears you, and he sees you. Always, no exceptions. Looking forward to catching up with you in Zoom. See you in a bit then. Bye.